Welcome back to RSA Conference 2021, live from the virtual broadcast alley. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. Joining me for this micro interview is Rickard Carlsson, the co-founder and CEO of Detectify. We'll be talking today about why you should challenge shift-left testing to create a better and safer application. We're, of course, sponsored in this segment by Detectify. And you can learn more by visiting securityweekly.com/Detectify. Rickard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Nice to have you here. So I want to hear about this challenge of shifting left, because we always hear the phrase shifting left like a lot when we talk about application security. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, the base concept is when development processes collapse. If you think about a modern organization where you have fully integrated domain-driven teams that operates in a DevOps capacity, what are you then going to shift left into? Because I guess the shift left concept comes from when you were a big enterprise and you had maybe QA testing, security review, and you have 5 different gates to push a software into production. But in the modern world where the same team evaluates, tests, and ships and controls production environments for their small segment of a product, what is then to shift left into?
Yeah, there's certainly, so many different points in the software development lifecycle and the software chain, right, to inject security. And I think sometimes we focus too heavily on making sure the developer writes perfect code, and we all know that's not going to happen.
No. And I think the whole thing is about how do you enable the team to use the right tool at the right point in time. I mean, a static tool works best in some setups. A dynamic tool works best in some setup. A library type of testing tool works in some setups. And those are all types of tools that you might want to give to your developers. But talking about shift left, then that I think it means that you still keep this old like waterfall development process that I think most organizations are trying to get away from.
Yeah, it's interesting in the way you describe that. It seems like if we shift our security focus left, it puts more work and responsibility on the developer to spend more time in the code, and we can kind of almost reverse back to waterfall where they're spending too much time coding, where they should push it out and allow the rest of the process that is flowing right to identify those security vulnerabilities, but then inform the developer. Did I capture that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the whole idea, because when a team runs security testing, and if that testing is then controlled by some central team, it's going to go from central review, and then everything needs to go through the same funnel and process, and then it takes a week to get back to the security team because someone needs to look at it, and you have halted operations. That doesn't work, because I mean, everybody wants to be able that the team should be able to ship code immediately and instantly, but then they need also to be able to test both their libraries and dependencies, their static code, but also their dynamic testing at instantly, both in, maybe for example, a staging environment, but also in the live production environment, because the same thing, staging and production is not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So you need to be able to then to run all the tests, the right test at the right point in time. That's, I guess, what we're talking about, trying to challenge. So I think just the notion of shift left means that you're still stuck in a waterfall process. I mean, I think DevOpsSec is a much more relevant term to use for modern security.
Also, I also feel like when you shift that testing right, that you can have a better understanding of the priority than you would if I'm sitting in a source code, editor in an IDE, and it's telling me that I could be introducing a security bug. There's so many unknowns at that point. I don't think you get to a certain point in the right side of development where if you're getting in production, as you say, you can say, this is going to be a huge issue in production from a security perspective. All these other things, maybe not, and flow that back into the developers. So they're fixing the right bugs that have the highest priority, which that's also a benefit.
Yeah, because something that is a high critical, that is high in staging, might not be high critical in production. And I think that's the whole concept that we talk to many organizations that says, oh, we need to make sure that the software is bug-free before we push it to production. I don't know if that is the best way to secure an organization. I think the best way is to make sure that you're able to fast fix something that you encounter. I don't say that you should ship shitty code, but to focus, trying to push out, so to say, completely error-free products, I think that won't really work, because also what you push today with new bugs and new vulnerabilities being researched and identified every day, it means rather that you need to be able to update and run the processes fast, rather than to find things maybe in the earliest way.
Yeah, and that has two benefits to the business. One, I'm shipping product much faster, and two, I'm finding probably not just bugs, but also security fixes much faster. And then if I tune my processes that notify developers quickly, I think that's the key, and enable them to fix them. Do you have tips for kind of that information flow from finding a bug in production and getting it to the right developer?
I think the critical thing here is, I sometimes see that there is a balance here, because you also need to have almost organizations are afraid because you don't want to give developers too much noise. So sometimes they need to wash, you want to wash results or clean them before you hand them over to the developer, because otherwise you will overload them with information. But that goes then that you would see that they would see security as something that is negative. I think one of the benefits here is that they need to see security as part of their daily job, and something that is equally important as shipping features, that security is a natural part of it. I think that's one thing. The second thing is that you need to give them direct access to the information, because it needs to be in the tools and in the information that they are using. For a static code analyzer, then it's easier. Then, of course, the information should come directly in the IDE. But for maybe then a dynamic tool, then it needs to come through the tools that people are using. If it's Slack or OpsGenie, or if it's directly into Jira or whatever they are using, that's the way the information needs to go. So to give people then access to the information they need to resolve the issues.
Yeah, and I like being able to prioritize that in Jira as well. I like to use Jira to archive everything, but focus developers on certain tags. Like the DAS found a security bug or vulnerability in the production system. That should carry with it a tag that gets the developer's attention. And yet, it might have found 10 other things, but don't worry about those right now.
No, we have one organization that we work with that I think we have made it in a fairly interesting way. I think they have 500 or 600 engineers or developers. Everyone have access to all the information and all the vulnerabilities for all teams. However, they get routed automatically, the information is relevant for their team. And if they don't have acted on it and resolved it, I think it in a set of, a week, then a central security operations team gets notified, and then they reach out and say, hey, why haven't you resolved this? And supporting them and giving them help. But the base here is that they give the information available and make it accessible for everyone.
Yeah, and I also like that strategy, because as a developer, if I'm going to go fix a bug or a security vulnerability, and I know the code pretty well, maybe it's my section of code, I want to know about like all the other things in there, because I want to fix some of those too, right? I just don't want to get like one bug and go, okay, I'm going to go fix that, and then have it automatically regression tested, and then go, I got to go back in that same section of code and maybe fix a different bug. Like, I want to try and group those together. I think that's a much better strategy, even though it kind of fights the DevOps moving faster. I think there's a balance in like, fix all the stuff. We're going to be in this code, like fix as much stuff as you can, right? And
it challenges the basic, the old security print, the rules of least privileged access, because and I think, that's the base for compliance. But maybe in the future, we need to challenge how much information is least privileged access. Maybe we actually need to raise that bar and don't be so afraid of sharing information with the internal team. Because I have an organization I speak to that say, no, we cannot give the developers access to the vulnerabilities in larger scale, because they might use it against us because we don't trust them. Okay, so the people that are actually pushing code, you want them to move fast, but you don't trust them. Then there is something that how you set up your system, I think, that is maybe not that healthy.
Yeah, I like the information sharing concept, Rickard, a lot, because I think in the end of the day, it helps the developer. And different strokes for different folks, too. You may not want to overwhelm your junior developers, right? And you have to tune to your audience accordingly. But restricting all the information doesn't allow people to grow either, right? Maybe as a junior developer, hey, I want to go look at all these vulnerabilities and try and understand them, and then apply them. It might take me a little longer, but they're going to have to learn it at some point, and hiding information is not helping them.
Because, I mean, the main challenge, if I follow up on that, the main challenge in most organizations, everybody talks about, oh, there's 1.5 million cybersecurity professionals lacking in the world, and it grows for every day, and so on. But the whole, if you want people to learn, you need to give them access to the information they need to look and thrive, because that's when they will be great at things.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, I've done a couple of interviews about some security research teams that are just pouring through code and finding vulnerabilities. Is that something we can teach to developers, or do you recommend that there are people on the team that are really just looking at the code and looking for vulnerabilities, or can some of that also be automated, and how do you strike the balance?
Yeah. I mean, my experience is Detectify, we work with a fairly big group of different security researchers externally as well, that we source vulnerabilities through our tools. I mean, many of the best people supporting things there are actually working as developers by day and then security researchers by night. Because if you from the outside knows how a system behaves, and when you're building things during the day, you guys, here I messed up. Wonder if other people also have messed up in the same way as I did today. And then you try it out and see if you can exploit it. And I think that is where the many interested and highly capable engineers and developers, they will thrive as security people, just if you give them the responsibility and give them also maybe the accountability to do it.
And should they also be in the agile kind of spirit, writing tests for those in their own QA cycle, or do you see some of those tests also being in some of the DAS scanning? Like, where do you put your test, I guess, once you've done some of that analysis internally?
Yeah, I think that's the difference. I guess most tools does not allow for people to write and configure tests. We just released a new way, actually, with Detectify. We released a tool that's partially open, that's open sourced from our internal things, that we call the Ugly Duckling. And that is like a minimized version of our internal scanners, but that supports the same type of JSON format that we use internally, that you could run and specify and build tests. And I mean, I don't say it's not unlikely that also those tests will be able to, that you will be able to import them in the future into Detectify as well. So we want people, that you should be able to, run tests and build things locally. But then if you need scale and automation, then you should use maybe a provider to do that.
Right. In your results too, how deep you're going with the feedback back to developers? Is it like proof that it was exploited, or is it tips on how to fix it? Like, how much is included in there today?
Yeah. In our tool, Detectify, 99% of our tests are payload based, and then the developer gets, and we're able to see the payloads and everything that we ran, because we don't do signature based testing, because that creates too much noise and too much false positives. So we only do what we call payload based testing, or that we are able to have a fully weaponized payload on. Otherwise, we won't run the tests.
And how when people use Detectify in the kind of software chain process, how do you iterate quickly, right, and scan that stuff quickly? I think people still have the perception that, it's a web app scanner, it's going to take a really long time, right? Yeah. I think vendors such as yourselves have really worked to improve that, knowing that we're moving fast.
I mean, a DAS tool, and that's always the comments on dynamic scanners, because they are slightly slower. And then it should not be part of like a break build process. But what I'm moving towards is, many organizations are maybe doing external testing of their production environment once per quarter. Wow. If you just, as a first step, move that to once per week, and that the developer team gets direct access to the results, I think you have moved yourself taking a big step. Instead of, and then next step is maybe that you do it on triggers based on build systems and similar. But the status today is that many people are still stuck at, it's done by the central security team, and it's done once per quarter or once per month because of some shitty compliance standards tells you to do it that frequently. But just moving it to a weekly testing and giving the people direct access to it, then you have taken quite a few steps to moving to a much more agile way of testing.
Yeah, and I like that because you're reducing your technical debt in that case. If you wait till once a month or once a quarter, you've written so much code that now the fixing it is harder. I find it easier to fix as you go and reduce that technical debt because you've written less lines of code before you've fixed that. In some of the large open source projects have gotten into trouble. It's not necessarily their fault. I mean, their projects date back sometimes to the 90s. They're still writing code in the same project today. So just, overcoming that technical debt is huge. If you're in an enterprise today developing applications, I think you have tools available like Detectify to help you with that problem.
Yeah, I mean, we have some customers, unfortunately, they say, yeah, this is a medium-sized bug, and it will be implemented and resolved in 90 days. That's when I get scared.
Yeah, that's too long. Too much stuff changes. I mean, you're writing, like if you've got a bug in a central function or library, and now you're writing more and more code that relies on that, now you're just constantly incrementing the amount of time it takes to fix that bug. That's awesome. So you mentioned that you have an open source tool that people can use in their development processes to more quickly find bugs and do testing. Is there any other features that you want to talk about, Rickard?
I mean, I think that's not. I don't think it's something big. It was something that we thought was fun to do, and we released it because it was mainly targeting our crowdsource community, because we have this group of about a few hundred freelance hackers that when they find new attack patterns and general things, they send us these, so to say, proof of concepts and payloads, and we build them into the scanner. And it takes us, when we're really fast, it takes about 15 minutes from submission to when it's live in our environment. And to even further speed up that process, we say, hey, let's give the freelance hackers or our crowd community this engine that is compatible with our internal formats. But then we don't know if it's going to be used more by others or not. We have put it out as a small test.
Yeah.
To see how we can work with, because I think we talk often a way of collaboration rules. We want to collaborate with the world outside of our company, both with customers and the hackers and so on, to build an environment that can, funnel information and vulnerabilities in the right directions. And we would like them to be able to automate the shit out of this in the center.
Yeah. No, and I really like that approach because web application attacks, the new techniques and variations of techniques come out all the time, and I think crowdsourcing that is absolutely the right approach.
So I think that's the most fun. And then we released this Ugly Duckling. It's a super small project, but as a first step to see if this is a good way to collaborate even more.
Outstanding. Rickard, thank you so much for coming on Security Weekly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. For folks who want to learn more, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Detectify.